I mean, so my perspective on language, which I learned from a friend of mine that I was doing disability student kind of organizing with, was the phrase language flexible. And I like that idea. Like, I tend to use whatever language helps support a relationship. Like, what language are others around me using that I can participate in the language that's being used, rather than saying or making claims that some words are better than other words. Because I think sometimes we can get very attached to the meaning of a word or which word is the right word, and we can forget that there's all this other stuff behind the word. Like, what language do we have access to? What language exists in particular places? You can have all sorts of critical ideas that, and still be using, a more mainstream kind of language. Like, I don't think that those things are
prohibitive.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So I tend to try to use a variety of language. When I'm talking to psychiatrists or doctors or whoever, I use more medical language because that's how they're interpreting me, and I don't really want to have a conversation with them about the other kinds of language that I do. So it's like the language of least resistance. I think when navigating accommodations or government kind of forums, we get kind of clumped together around a language of disability. So I use that, and I like using that because I think that connects us to each other across a variety of kinds of experiences, rather than separating ourselves under more kind of specific language. I like using the word crazy because I just really love the word crazy. Where language is helpful or has been helpful to me is that it allows me to identify who I might share experiences in common with, and it helps me find people that might have similar experiences so that I can feel less lonely. So if we didn't have organizations or groups that used some sort of language around mental health or disability or chronic illness, I would have where do I go? Like, where do I go to find people? So I think, or like when I do identify as a service user, or somehow am publicly identifying, that's not necessarily how I would talk to like express who I am, but it's a way of other people maybe hearing the language I use and finding something in common with that. Like, that's like, I also have that experience that they've kind of used. So, but yeah, I also don't want to be seen as like the service user person or like limited or reduced to some sort of language that I use.
And I agree that like disability should be seen as not different, and then that would make the language less offensive. And I do like the word crazy, and I say it about myself, and I'm fine with like friends and other people from the community saying that. But I think it still would make me really uncomfortable if someone from outside of the community said that to me or used it as a
slur.
Yeah, as a slur, a descriptor of who I am, because like it's the emotion behind what you're saying that determines whether or not it's offensive.
And they're using like the negative connotation, whereas you might be using a more community-based connotation, but you can tell that there's this rooted in negativity.
Same with, like, incredibly diagnostic language makes me really upset sometimes, especially if it's people assuming your diagnosis, and then with that is language that promotes stereotypes and examples in class that promote stereotypes really, really upset me. So, like, for example, using like a story in your teaching about someone with a mental health concern who was really violent, or, someone with a physical disability who was really dependent, needed assistance, or seemed, very weak. Like, these things, it's the way that you talk about things changes the way that people see them. So that's important, I think, in terms of your language, is making sure that you frame things in a way that doesn't promote negative ideas about people with disabilities.
Yeah, and that's so important in the classroom, because you can really pick up on kind of the dynamics of your students or your instructor, or what's possible to say in a classroom, based on the kinds of language that gets used by everyone in the room. And you can figure out, like, if I speak in a particular way about disability, will people be able to understand what I'm saying? And like actually be able to have a conversation with me. And so if it's like pretty clear that folks in the room are approaching at a very medical perspective, then I would know if I want to bring up kind of a critique of the medical system that I might be on my own in doing that, or it might take a lot of explanation to do that, and that might be something I don't want to take on.
Presenting the different sides as the professor can help open up that conversation and make it easier for students with disabilities to present their side as well.
So for some clear takeaways for professors to sort of watch in the classroom could be things like using context to frame situations when you're talking about pupils with disabilities, not perpetuating stereotypes by using language that feeds into assumptions that people might already have about pupils with disabilities.
Especially if that's tied into like any sort of role play or case study or something where we get positioned in this very limited kind of way. Yeah.
I think those are some pretty clear, helpful suggestions.
Yeah, and using a variety of language so that students know that you're aware that there's a variety of language, or that they might use a variety of language. I mean, making sure your syllabus and whatever you say about accommodations or disability is positive and supportive.